At a time when subsidy politics is making headlines back home, it's such a pleasure to have with us here in Davos Jyotiraditya Scindia to talk about what's happening back home and what's happening in the global economy. Thanks so much, Mr. Scindia, for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me first talk to you about the fact that the presence of the large government delegation here in Davos has got the opposition extremely angry, saying they failed on all economic fronts. What are they doing in Davos?
Well, I'm glad we're getting them riled up going into the election. I think that's a good sign for us. Number one. Number two, I fail to understand what they mean by a large delegation. My numbers may be incorrect, but I believe that 4 ministers are in Davos. Yeah. I don't necessarily think that's a large delegation.
So if we include Dr. Ahluwalia and say even Chief Minister Chavan, so it is a large government presence in that sense.
Well, yes and no. I don't think even if you look at five cabinet ministers, a chief minister of a state, I don't think
and
that's
Mr.
necessarily.
Praful Patel was meant to be here, so that would have taken it up to 6 and a chief minister.
Well, you can go on adding the numbers, but I mean, whether you add 1 or 2, I grant you that.
Large
I don't necessarily think so. I think that 4 ministers and 1 chief minister is not necessarily a large delegation. And in any case, I think it's important that as India looks outward, as opposed to the BJP's mindset, which is always to look inward, I think it's important to engage with the world. What would the BJP like? Would the BJP like India not to be represented on global forums? Would the BJP like India's viewpoint not to be expressed on global forums? I certainly believe. Let me just finish, sure. Shweta. I certainly believe that as an Indian, being a minister aside or as a member of parliament aside, I think it's very important that India's voice is heard in global forums. And that voice must not be purely only governments. It must be represented across various sectors. And that's why, whether it's the corporate sector, whether it's the social sector, whether it's the government sector, all of those voices are here in Davos. And I think it's important. I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it,
right.
But certainly India must be represented. When we are 17% of the world's population, I don't see why we shouldn't.
No, that's fair, but perhaps the charge that has come is the failure on the economic front, and that's something that even the large corporate delegation present here in Davos says, that on the economic front there's been a huge disappointment. The sharp slowdown that we've seen, the policy flip-flops that we've seen, it's clearly not a story that you can sell to global leaders here.
Well, Shweta, here also I'd like to just say this, that I think it's important that when things start slowing down, the effects of that manifest themselves probably 6 to 8 months down the cycle. Similarly, when things start to move northwards, those also manifest themselves 4 or 5 months into that cycle. I think in the last 5 to 6 months, the cabinet, the government, have really speeded things up. Yes, we have realized that the economy in India had slowed. Having said that, I don't want to be defensive about India, because even today, at 5.5%, you're probably leading the world in terms of growth.
But is it
Granted,
enough? Is it enough?
So let me just come to that, if you just allow me to finish.
Yeah.
That's not as well as we'd like to perform.
Sure.
And apart from me being a minister in this government, as an Indian, I certainly do believe that we can perform at 7.5%, 8%. And we intend to get there. And I think the policy moves that you've seen over the last 4 to 5 months, whether it's speedy clearances, whether it's government programs, whether it's the policies that we've enunciated, and I, for one, can certainly speak on the power sector.
Right.
I think you can see signs of sunlight and a new beginning emanating as we move along.
Ahead of elections, can we expect sound economic policies or just populism? For instance, we are seeing states going ahead and cutting power tariffs. As the power minister, is that a trend that worries you? It's really subsidy politics at play.
Well, we spoke about this earlier this morning. Let me say this, that longer term, as Power Minister of India, it's not necessarily a healthy sign. Having said that, as Power Minister of India, I am absolutely fine with any state government deciding whether a segment of their consumer base needs a certain subsidy. That's not a decision for me, but for that state government to take. Having said that, it's absolutely essential and mandatory as Power Minister to ensure that the discoms remain revenue neutral.
Right.
And therefore, if you intend to give a subsidy, you're absolutely empowered to do that as a state government. But certainly, it must be on the balance sheet of that state government and not on the balance sheet of the discom. Because the whole financial restructuring package that I pushed and I championed was based fundamentally on that premise. We've had close to about 100,000 crores worth of loans being rescheduled. It's been a tremendous success. You've seen the balance sheets of a lot of these discoms being cleaned up. You've seen the revenue neutrality taking place. And I think that it's extremely important to ensure that the whole value chain of the power business becomes fungible. And that is a real pillar of that. So to me, I don't have any objection to it as long as it is borne by the balance sheet of the state government and not the discount.
I remember talking to you the last time around in Davos, and that time you had made one point very clear, that we need to sensitize consumers to the fact that they will have to pay more for power, and that power is not going to be cheap, and the days of cheap power are clearly over. At the same time, when we see this trend ahead of elections of these populist moves of states going ahead and cutting power tariffs, isn't it a very unhealthy move, given the fact that you need to start sensitizing people to the fact that input costs are going up after all? You cannot go ahead and go on subsidizing power.
Well, yes and no. I don't think that you can broad brush in that one statement. Input costs as a raw material in power vary across sectors. On renewables, you're actually seeing Moore's law coming into play, and you're seeing pricing falling dramatically, exponentially. And I do believe that we should be achieving grid parity on solar, for example, in the next 2 to 3 years. On thermal, certainly, coal is becoming a scarce commodity, which is why we allowed for the pass-through mechanism.
Right.
On hydro, longer term, these projects, their costs fall dramatically, but they are higher upfront. So they vary from source to source. Having said that, I certainly do believe, as I said earlier, that it's the prerogative of the state government to take that decision. And if it's fiscally prudent for them to do so, and they do believe that a certain amount of their revenue can be used for a power subsidy, that's their decision to take. I don't think I should sit in judgment on that, but as long as the discoms are revenue neutral.
What are your views on the policies being followed by the Aam Aadmi Party, particularly with regard to power? There's been enough noise that has taken place. They're demanding an audit. We've seen the companies moving the court. These developments in the last few weeks are clearly focusing on your sector.
Again, I do believe that distribution is the prerogative of the state governments. It's not something on which I mandate policy making. I do believe that decentralization across the value chain is a healthy sign, which is why I am auguring for much more private sector participation in transmission as well as distribution. In fact, I've put together a case study of a number of distribution models, and I shared that with the state power ministers in the last power conference that I had. But that being said, I think I don't want to impinge upon the decision-making area of a state government.
Right.
I certainly do believe in life, in probity. And if they want to conduct an audit, that's their decision to take. I don't think.
Would you support an audit? Do you think
Well,
there is a need to be the audit?
Well,
there's a need for an audit on that?
I don't think that I need to profess an opinion on that, because it's not
But you're the power minister.
Maybe, but it's not in my area of jurisdiction. I think it's a state government subject, and I think in India one of the big problems that we do face that everyone has an opinion on everything, and I think it's important that to allow something which is not your prerogative and not your domain
but this is very much your prerogative. You are the power minister.
Maybe
whether or not an audit should happen is something
that depends upon the cases that we're talking about. And let me profess, I don't have the detailed information on what the issues are with those particular discoms, because that's not my mandate.
Okay, but in principle, you're saying that it's a healthier trend if we have more probity, if we're going towards more transparency, and an audit would perhaps lead us that way.
Well, it's a very fine edge, Shweta, because you also don't want to go down the route of unnecessary harassment. So I think it's a very fine edge that you need to weigh, and I think that decision has to be taken having the full information with you. That full information is with the Delhi state government. It's not with me, and therefore would not be right of me to take a judgment call on whether that's the right thing to do or not.
But at least in terms of tariffs coming down and many states doing that, many call it the effect of the Aam Aadmi Party. Would you agree with that? The fact that they came on a promise of lower power tariffs and other states
Shweta,
had to follow.
I don't believe that this is a something that's innovative or something that's ingenious that they've come up with. Many state governments across our country give power subsidy. This is not the first time in India.
The trend that we are seeing in the last few weeks after the
well, maybe
maybe
it does have to do with the fact that you've got elections coming up, but that's a short-term phenomena. In the next 6 months, those elections are going to be behind us. I certainly believe, as power minister, I need to make the value chain much more fungible, much more revenue generating, and therefore attract much more investment into it, because clearly India has a huge demand for power. We have a capacity of close to 236 gigs as we speak. By 2022, we'll have a demand of 400 gigs. By 2032, a demand of 800 gigs. So we have a long, challenging way ahead. For the first time in the history of India, we put in place generation capacity of in excess of 20 gigs for the last 2 years consecutively.
No,
and I think, and the fact that we've connected the southern grid way before time. 1 quarter, I had promised all of you 31st of March. We connected on the 31st of December. And it's for the first time in the history of our country that a public sector project has actually got commissioned way before a private sector project.
So no,
I
your
think
last
these are all
13
very,
months
very healthy signs.
have been absolutely remarkable, and we've seen tremendous change coming about in the power sector. Of course, now politics is taking over, and it is subsidy politics that we're seeing in the power sector. Challenging times, both for power and for India as such. We'll have to wait and see how this goes through, but wishing you all the best with regard to the elections as well as your visit here in Davos.
Thank you very much, Shweta. It's been a pleasure
Thank you.
to be with you.
Thank you so much.